It's years behind schedule and tens of billions of dollars over budget, but oil is now flowing through the Trans Mountain Pipeline expansion.
Expanding Canada's oil and gas infrastructure has long been a contentious topic, but tough tariffs have forced the country to take a closer look at its sovereignty and self-reliance on its own resources.
April 2nd, 2025, a day that will go down in history as the moment America lost control of its energy future. In the dense forests of British Columbia, there is a pipeline that is now carrying oil in a new direction, away from America's hungry refineries and straight to the Pacific. After decades of feeding the U.S. economy at a bargain, Canada was done playing second fiddle. So while American politicians were obsessed with tariffs and trade wars, a Chinese titan named Rangsheng quietly slipped into Canada's oil heartland, signing contracts, securing over 800,000 barrels of Canadian oil to ship to Asia. Why does it matter? Because America's energy security, economic stability, and global influence just took a massive hit, and the one person who could have stopped it, he didn't even see it coming. Ready to see how this could change everything? Watch closely. The fight is just getting started. Trump's tariff gambit explodes. Trump thought a 10% tariff would bring Canada to its knees. Instead, it shoved them into China's arms. What began as a campaign stunt to reassert economic control spiraled into an international humiliation. Announcing a 10% import tariff on Canadian oil and gas, President Trump expected Canada to blink. He expected Prime Minister Mark Carney to back down. Instead, Carney doubled down. Within weeks, Canadian energy executives were rerouting crude destined for American refineries toward Asian ports. Rather than demanding leniency, Suncor, Cenovus, and Canadian Natural Resources Limited struck back by accelerating deals with Chinese, Indian, and Japanese buyers. And unlike American buyers, who negotiated hard and added political strings, these new customers simply paid more. The economic math was simple. Asia needed energy. Canada needed leverage. Trump gave them both. Then came China's next move. That's when Washington really started to sweat. But before I reveal what they did, take a sec to subscribe to our channel, because that would really help us a lot. Thank you very much. China's oil offensive begins in Calgary. They didn't bring tanks, they brought tankers. What looked like a quiet commercial expansion turned out to be the opening shot in a new kind of energy war. Rangsheng Prochemical wasn't just setting up shop in Calgary. They were embedding themselves in the heart of North American energy. With an office perched inside a sleek downtown tower, Rangsheng began locking down deals. First with Suncor, then with Cenovus, and soon after with Canadian Natural Resources. Their goal? To secure 10% of the Trans Mountain expansion's total shipping capacity by the year 2026. And they weren't just buying oil, they were buying options. The shipping terms gave Rangsheng what American refineries never had: flexibility. With free on-board agreements, they could divert tankers mid-voyage, sending oil to Japan or India depending on where profits were highest. Analysts at Standard & Poor's Global warned this alone could earn Rangsheng up to $3 per barrel in arbitrage profits. The stakes were bigger than profits. Canada, long cast as America's energy sidekick, was now being courted as a sovereign supplier. In the words of one Alberta oil executive, this isn't just a trade shift, it's a diplomatic divorce. China wasn't stealing oil, it was offering a new alliance. And Canada, weary of years under America's economic thumb, was finally ready to say yes. The United States had just lost its monopoly on the fuel of the future. The death of America's energy discount. American refiners had treated Canadian crude like a discount bin treasure. With few routes to global markets, Canada had no choice but to accept lower prices. On average, U.S. buyers paid $15 less per barrel for oil from Alberta than they did from anywhere else. It was the unspoken deal that underpinned North America's energy economy. That deal is now dead, with interest. The Trans Mountain expansion changed the game overnight, tripling capacity to 890,000 barrels per day. The pipeline now ships enough oil to fill 50 Olympic-sized swimming pools daily. None of that oil needs to flow south. Early shipments already reached South Korea in August of 2024. Japan and India are next. With demand in Asia outpacing supply, Canada's once captive crude is now a global commodity with bidding wars to match. For American refiners, the impact is brutal. Not only must they now pay full global prices, they're also competing with buyers who don't have to worry about Trump's erratic tariffs. One executive at a Louisiana refinery called the new situation untenable. Consumers are feeling it. According to Goldman Sachs, The average price at the pump could rise by as much as 80 cents per gallon if current trends hold. That means higher costs not just for gasoline, but for everything that depends on it: transport, manufacturing, food delivery, even electricity in some regions. Oil was just the beginning. The next hit came from Canada's gas, and it was nuclear. LNG Canada unleashes a new energy superpower. It's not just pipelines anymore. Canada is about to dominate the seas. While the Trans Mountain expansion rewired North America's oil arteries, the real disruption was quietly waiting on the British Columbia coastline. In the shadows of Kitimat's snow-capped mountains, the mammoth $40 billion liquefied natural gas facility, known as LNG Canada, began final operations in late 2025. Shell and PetroChina led the charge, and together they flipped the global gas equation upside down. For the first time in history, Canada could ship natural gas directly to Asia without touching American soil. 14 million tons annually. That was the initial output projection, bound for ports in Japan, China, and Germany. This wasn't just a commercial leap. It was geopolitical theater at full volume. The Indo-Pacific, once dominated by Qatari and Russian gas, now had a new player, one with stability, proximity, and political neutrality. It was no coincidence. Prime Minister Mark Carney had been orchestrating this shift since his predecessor unveiled the $6.5 billion Global Markets Accelerator program. $5 billion was earmarked for Canadian energy exporters breaking into Asia. $1 billion more went to shield domestic agriculture from American tariff retaliation. This was never a one-off project. It was a master plan. Washington didn't react immediately, perhaps underestimating the full scope of Canada's maritime ambitions. But global markets noticed. By the time the first shipment left Kitimat's deepwater terminal, spot prices on the Tokyo Commodity Exchange had already begun to recalibrate, treating Canada as a primary supplier rather than a fallback. Canada was no longer a quiet neighbor. It was an energy sovereign state with Pacific reach. Yet as natural gas tankers slipped into the fog and vanished westward, something else was stirring, an even more invisible threat. And this time it wasn't fuel, it was electricity. America's lights start flickering. First the gas disappeared, then came the blackouts. In what seemed like an unthinkable unraveling, large swaths of the United States began to experience rolling blackouts during peak demand hours. Michigan, New York, and California were hit hardest, with utility companies issuing warnings about grid instability. The culprit, a quiet shift in hydroelectric exports. Hydro-Quebec and Ontario Power Generation, which together exported over 42 terawatt-hours of electricity to the United States in 2024, began dialing back their output. Officially, it was a supply reallocation to meet domestic and Asian contracts. Unofficially, the move was widely seen as a strategic retaliation for the tariff escalation spearheaded by the Trump administration. Without Canadian hydro to balance its grid during peak hours, the United States faced a grim energy bottleneck. Gas peaker plants weren't fast enough to respond. Aging infrastructure in the Northeast couldn't keep pace, and renewable energy, while growing, still lacked the storage capacity to prevent outages. In cities like Buffalo and Sacramento, households went dark during dinner hours. In Detroit, steel plants operated at half capacity. And in New York City, traffic lights blinked out across boroughs, causing mayhem. And the American president, facing a historic domestic crisis, turned to the one thing he knew best: distraction. Inside Trump's energy meltdown, while America scrambled for oil, Trump tweeted about Tesla, as refinery executives pleaded for emergency access to cheaper crude, and energy regulators warned of cascading grid failures. The president was busy attacking Canada's dairy quotas and promoting electric vehicle giveaways on Truth Social. The situation was spiraling. Trump's 10% tariff on Canadian oil had already slashed supply. American refiners, who depended on Canadian heavy crude for their complex facilities, struggled to adapt to lighter alternatives from Venezuela and the Middle East. Domestic shale output couldn't scale fast enough, especially not with pipeline bottlenecks in the Permian Basin and worker shortages plaguing Texas operations. Social media erupted. Hashtags like gas price doom and Trump blackout trended across platforms. Videos of Americans paying over $5.20 per gallon at California gas stations went viral. Food prices climbed. Factory hours were slashed. Trucking companies canceled routes. It felt less like an energy crisis and more like a national unraveling. Trump tried to redirect the blame. In speech after speech, He invoked the name of the former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, claimed Canada had been planning this betrayal for years, that their shift to Asia was economic warfare. The reality? Trudeau had already exited politics. It was Carney's administration now, and Trump hadn't even acknowledged the transition. Every deflection made him look more out of touch. And then, just as the chaos hit its peak, a press conference was called in Calgary, a name few Americans had ever heard prepared to speak. Rangsheng declares a new era. With one deal, China just hijacked North America's energy future. Standing before a wall of flags and a sleek holographic map of Pacific shipping lanes, a senior executive from Rangsheng Chemical made the announcement. The company had secured long-term control of 10% of the Trans Mountain Expansion pipeline's capacity. 10%, 89,000 barrels per day, wasn't just a trade figure, it was a declaration. And it was locked in through FOB, or free on board terms. That meant once the oil was loaded in Burnaby, it belonged to Rangsheng. They could redirect it to Tokyo, Seoul, Mumbai, whoever bid the highest. The flexibility alone allowed them to net $2 to $3 per barrel in arbitrage profits. But the message was even more powerful. The United States no longer had first dibs on Canadian crude. Rangsheng wasn't some upstart firm. It was the energy arm of one of China's largest holding groups, with decades of refining expertise and deep ties to Canadian oil executives. Behind the scenes, they were already courting other producers: Cenovus Energy, Canadian Natural Resources, even multinationals like British Petroleum and Shell, with long-standing stakes in Alberta's oil sands. The United States Department of Defense flagged the move as a strategic threat. Wall Street analysts began issuing notes warning that American energy security was being outsourced by accident. And yet the markets didn't panic. They adjusted, as if the world had already accepted that the balance had shifted. Canada, for its part, was clear-eyed. Energy ministers referred to the deal as the beginning of a post-American era. Alberta's premier called it economic sovereignty in action. They weren't just selling oil anymore. They were picking their customers. In the United States, Trump was still searching for leverage, still looking for an enemy, and still holding one final economic weapon in reserve, one that would set off a global firestorm: the nuclear tariff threat. When your biggest supplier finds a new buyer, you do not threaten them, you negotiate. Trump did not do what any sound business leader would. Instead, he unleashed an abrupt tariff assault that stunned not only industry experts, but ordinary citizens as well. In a shock maneuver, his administration declared a 25% tariff across Canadian oil, natural gas, and even electric vehicles. This bold, perilous move came on the heels of Canada finalizing a landmark agreement with top Asian buyers, a development that redefined the flow of energy across continents. Canadian producers, now empowered by a shift in global demand, were signing contracts with China and India on terms that trumped all previous arrangements. As Canadian oil began to flow in a new direction, American refineries were forced into rapid, unplanned adjustments that sent shockwaves through the national economy. American refineries, which had long depended on discounted Canadian crude to remain competitive, found themselves caught in a sudden crisis. Companies that had counted on steady margins saw their profit estimates evaporate overnight. The cost structure of refining operations, once stabilized by reliable, affordable imports, became destabilized as market operators struggled to source alternative supplies. In major ports along the Gulf Coast and in industrial heartlands of the Midwest, refiners experienced an unprecedented squeeze. Stocks of crude dwindled, pipeline contracts were thrown into jeopardy, and once reliable profit margins crumbled like sandcastles before a relentless tide. The imposition of these tariffs rippled across the broader economy. When fuel prices spiked by nearly $5 per gallon in several key markets, industries across the board felt the strain. Steel manufacturers reported input cost hikes that saw prices surge by more than 22%. Agricultural sectors braced for disruptions as transport costs soared. Even food retailers began warning consumers about impending price increases on everyday essentials. It was as if the simple act of levying a tariff had unlocked a chain reaction, setting off a series of economic tremors that threatened to shake the foundations of an already struggling economic system. No administration had ever witnessed such a dramatic reversal of fortune in a matter of days. Instead of forcing Canada back to the negotiating table, Trump's tariff threat pushed Ottawa into a corner, one where the only available response was to retaliate by reorienting its energy markets entirely toward Asia. And when that confrontation reached its boiling point, it became clear that this was not a temporary spat, but the opening salvo of a larger, potentially transformative economic conflict. Canada slams the valve shut. This was not a diplomatic gesture. It was an act of outright economic warfare. In response to Trump's aggressive tariff threat, Ottawa made a decision that would alter the balance of North American energy forever. Without hesitation, the Canadian government halted all eastbound shipments of oil destined for American terminals along the eastern seaboard. Critical export channels serving major hubs in Maine, New Jersey, and South Carolina were shut down, leaving American refineries scrambling for alternatives. The shockwave was immediate and devastating. Across the United States, panic set in as refineries discovered their anticipated volumes were suddenly unavailable. Tankers that had once routinely carried Canadian crude now lay idle at foreign ports, and alternative suppliers from faraway lands could not deliver in the critical timeframes needed. The disruption had immediate and tangible consequences. Gas prices soared at retail pumps, and reports from major metropolitan regions indicated that fuel costs had spiked to record levels. Economic operators in sectors as diverse as trucking, aviation, and manufacturing began reporting severe delays and escalating operating costs. The movement sent ripples further still. Airlines faced mounting fuel costs that forced them to cut back on flight schedules, and automakers, already grappling with supply chain disruptions, saw an imminent threat to production lines reliant on steady energy inputs. Small business owners, particularly those in logistics and regional manufacturing, found themselves blindsided by a sudden and seemingly inexplicable energy crisis. The U.S. economy, which for so long had enjoyed the relative stability afforded by a dependable Canadian oil supply, was now thrust into an abrupt state of emergency. Even as American political leaders attempted to deflect blame and to offer assurances, the stark reality was evident on the ground. Refineries were reducing operations, production capacities were falling, and more ominously, this was not simply a temporary setback. The shutdown of Canadian oil exports struck at the very lifeblood of the nation's energy grid, setting in motion a downward spiral that resonated throughout every corner of the economy. With every passing day, the indicators worsened. The supply chain contracted further, and the costs of every commodity, from steel to basic foods, began to climb. And it was all about to get worse. Why? Well, subscribe first and I will tell you. It is really easy. Thank you. When Asia replaced America overnight, in a span of merely 3 weeks, the United States witnessed the vanishing of 11 million barrels from its supply network, a figure that underscored the astonishing speed at which the balance of power in global energy had shifted. While American markets were engulfed in chaos and uncertainty, Canada moved with a methodical precision that redefined its role on the world stage. Instead of meekly enduring the imposition of tariffs, Ottawa engaged directly with buyers in Asia, signing back-to-back long-term agreements that sealed its energy destiny with unprecedented clarity. In high-stakes negotiations with top officials from China and India, Canadian energy companies locked in contracts at premium prices, terms that left no room for the political interference that had long characterized U.S. energy policy. China's Rangsheng petrochemical and India's Bharat Petroleum emerged as key customers, committing to purchase hundreds of thousands of barrels per day on a permanent basis. In these deals, Canadian crude was priced not against American benchmarks, but with respect to the strong, surging markets of the Pacific. The transformation was comprehensive. The Trans Mountain Expansion pipeline, already tripled to an output of 890,000 barrels per day, began to channel oil in a completely new direction. Tankers berthed at British Columbia's marine terminals were now destined for refineries in South Korea, Japan, and beyond. This deliberate pivot signaled more than a simple shift in trade routes. It marked the end of an era. The long-standing discount that had once ensured Canadian oil flowed cheaply to the United States evaporated in a matter of days. Instead, strong buyer interest in Asia drove up prices, squeezing U.S. refiners who now found themselves competing with markets that had no political baggage. As American refineries' capacities dropped to historic lows, global energy flows realigned permanently. The United States, once the uncontested consumer of Canadian energy, was seeing its traditional market share evaporate, replaced by an energetic and rapidly expanding Asia that paid top dollar for dependable supply. In the midst of this fundamental realignment, Trump's administration stood paralyzed. The strategic error of enforcing a blunt tariff policy in a complex international marketplace became painfully apparent. While American decision-makers frantically searched for an escape, Canada, unburdened by the constraints of traditional U.S. politics, proceeded with its plans. Energy pipelines, shipping schedules, and long-term contracts were rewritten in real time. The new global energy order was emerging before the eyes of a stunned world. A world where America was no longer the main player in a game that valued stability, foresight, and mutual economic benefit over belligerent posturing. Make Canada the 51st state. This was no laughing matter. It was a proposal delivered in unyielding, stark terms. During a contentious live broadcast that rippled across social media, one of Trump's closest advisors boldly declared that if tariffs were harming American economic interests, the ultimate solution was to annex Canada into the United States. The advisor argued that true economic unity could be achieved by erasing borders entirely, dissolving the tariff problem once and for all. The announcement triggered a fierce global reaction. Prime Minister Mark Carney, speaking with determined authority, swiftly declared that Canada was not for sale. Leaders in Europe, the BRICS nations, and members of the Association of Southeast Asian Nations condemned the suggestion, accusing Washington of economic coercion and neo-imperial ambitions. Headlines decried the plan as a direct challenge to the established international order, and American credibility began to crumble under widespread international scorn. Investor confidence plummeted as the American dollar, long a pillar of global financial stability, weakened against the euro and Chinese yuan. Treasury yields surged as global investors sought refuge in reliable assets, and major financial commentators warned that annexing an entire nation threatened the very foundation of American economic policy. Even long-standing allies in NATO privately expressed concerns about the United States' unpredictable trajectory, while defense analysts warned that any move toward annexation would invite military and economic escalation. The proposal ignited an intense political debate at home. News networks, once echoing Trump's narrative, soon questioned the logic of such an extreme measure. Critics argued that the move would only further isolate the United States from crucial trading partners at a time when strategic alliances were indispensable. Even as domestic debate raged, Canada prepared to deliver one final decisive blow to America's crumbling trade apparatus, a historic transformation that promised to render old alliances obsolete and redefine global power structures. The collapse of United States refining power. When your largest refining hubs once served as the final destination for Canadian crude, they symbolized stability and market control. Today, those very refineries sit idle, their operations crippled by sudden shifts in trade and supply. The refining capacity of the United States has plunged from 89% to 71% almost overnight. Industrial plants in the Midwest have been forced to shut down as production halts ripple across the sector. Alternative crude suppliers, such as those from Venezuela and Saudi Arabia, now come with prohibitive costs that make them uncompetitive compared to the bargain Canadian oil that once flowed unchallenged. Economic indicators reveal that the collapse of these refining networks has triggered a surge in unemployment throughout the Rust Belt. Thousands of workers, long dependent on stable jobs at refineries and related industries, now face uncertainty and job losses. Manufacturing plants, intertwined with the energy sector, are experiencing significant downturns in output. This disruption has not only affected the energy market, but it has also begun to unsettle the broader economy. Local businesses, reliant on consistent energy prices, struggle to pass along skyrocketing costs to consumers without igniting public backlash. As American industries reel from the impact of this supply chain catastrophe, the tremors hint at an impending systemic breakdown. A palpable sense of crisis is emerging on every level, and the United States finds itself locked in a struggle to recover from a sudden shift that began with one controversial policy move. Analysts warn that long-term damage to the economic foundation is inevitable if a solution is not found. It is clear that this collapse is more than a temporary setback. It signals the beginning of a profound transformation in global energy dynamics. The shockwaves from disrupted supply chains have sent ripples through financial markets, leaving investors jittery and market strategists scrambling for answers. The power of Canadian oil, once taken for granted, now echoes as a stark warning to those who depend on its flow. uncertainty, economic stagnation, and an urgent call for rapid adaptation define this new era in energy. A seismic pivot in corporate fortunes would soon set the stage for an even more startling development in the energy landscape. Tesla frozen out, electric vehicle dreams burned down. In a single weekend, Tesla lost $43 million in rebates, and its largest foreign market. The upheaval began when Canada abruptly suspended all subsidies for Tesla, following mounting evidence of rebate abuse. What initially appeared to be a routine regulatory measure rapidly evolved into a sweeping policy shift that signaled Canada's determination to take control of its domestic energy incentives. This move, broadly interpreted as a decisive retaliation for the United States' aggressive auto tariffs, sent shockwaves through the electric vehicle sector. Observers noted that the suspension of financial support was not merely a bureaucratic adjustment, but a strategic initiative intended to recalibrate market dynamics in favor of Canadian sovereignty. Investors watched in disbelief as Tesla's stock began to plummet sharply. Once celebrated for pioneering a new era in sustainable transportation, Tesla was suddenly at the mercy of political edicts that undermined its competitive edge. The loss of rebates, which amounted to a staggering $43 million, left the company scrambling to reassure its customer base and stabilize its financial outlook. Prominent industry figure Freeland issued a resolute statement declaring, "We will not fund foreign market manipulation," a comment that further fueled the controversy and contributed to the growing investor panic. This turmoil forced stakeholders to re-examine their commitments and question Tesla's strategy in an environment fraught with regulatory risks. Regional competitors seized the opportunity to capture market share as doubts about Tesla's long-term prospects intensified. The company now faced not only declining stock prices, but also a profound challenge in maintaining its leadership in a fiercely competitive international market. As Canadian authorities closed the door on additional financial support, the narrative shifted dramatically toward a reorientation of alliances. Market analysts emphasize that this policy shift not only imperiled Tesla's future, but also signaled a broader reorientation of global energy markets. The suspension of subsidies exposed deep vulnerabilities in trade-dependent industries and set the stage for realignments, disrupting established power. As the electric vehicle titan struggled under the weight of these setbacks, Canada's shifting alliances pointed toward an even more formidable counterbalance on the global stage. A coalition known as BRICS, which promised to redraw the rules of international trade and energy dependency. BRICS, oil, and the end of the petrodollar. What if oil no longer relied on the United States dollar? In a stunning twist to global economics, the BRICS coalition, comprising China, Russia, Brazil, India, South Africa, and other emerging economies, has embraced a full de-dollarization strategy. This deliberate shift is redefining trade by pricing Canadian oil and liquefied natural gas in yuan, rupee, and even gold. The price tags of vital energy commodities are being rewritten in a new currency lexicon, undercutting the traditional hegemony of the dollar in international markets. Trump, refusing to accept this transformation, responded with the most extreme measures available. In a dramatic announcement, he threatened 150% tariffs on imports from all BRICS member nations. These unprecedented measures sent tremors through financial markets. Investors, accustomed to the stability of a dollar-dominated trade system, watched as currency values fluctuated wildly, and confidence in the American economic model wavered. Exchange rates became volatile, and the dollar's long-standing position as the world's reserve currency was questioned with every tick in the trading session. Economic analysts warned that this shift represented not merely a temporary adjustment, but a fundamental realignment of global financial power. The era of the petrodollar, once the cornerstone of international trade, now faced a direct challenge from a multipolar currency world. Nations that had long relied on the dollar for energy transactions were forced to re-examine their options, seeking stability in a market that was rapidly changing before their very eyes. As the old monetary order crumbled, the consequences of this currency revolution set the stage for an ultimate blow, a destabilization that would strip the United States of not merely its oil, but the monetary crown itself. Financial institutions around the globe are retooling their strategies in response to this seismic shift. Traditional investors, long comfortable with the stability provided by the United States dollar, now scramble to diversify their portfolios into multiple currencies. Central banks are reconsidering reserve policies, and emerging markets are leveraging this moment to assert greater economic independence. The shockwaves extend to every corner of the global economy, forcing a re-evaluation of power structures that have dominated international trade for generations. This profound transformation not only redraws economic maps, but it also heralds the dawn of a truly multipolar financial era. The new map. America is no longer the center. The global energy map has changed, and the United States is no longer at the helm. Once the uncontested epicenter of energy consumption, America now finds itself sidelined in a global marketplace that is rapidly reorienting toward the east. Canada, seizing the moment of opportunity, has made a permanent pivot. Its oil, liquefied natural gas, and hydropower now flow eastward, forging strong new partnerships with key markets across Asia and Europe. Backup supply deals have been inked in major European capitals, ensuring that Ottawa's transformed energy exports remain robust and reliable. The implications for the United States are stark. Long-term recession risks loom as declining energy supply and inflated prices pressure every sector of the economy. American industries, long reliant on predictable and affordable energy, now grapple with mounting production costs that threaten to upend their competitive edge. Consumers face a new normal defined by soaring prices, diminishing supply, and a palpable sense of economic vulnerability. The familiar landscape of abundance has given way to one marked by scarcity and uncertainty. While policymakers and economists attempt to chart a course through this turbulent transition, economic indicators paint a grim picture. The reduced flow of Canadian energy has created gaps that alternative sources cannot fill without exorbitant expenses. American households, already burdened by high living costs, must now contend with a future where every gallon of fuel comes at a steep premium, and every product's price is indelibly affected by these disruptions. As the international community embraces this new order, the narrative is clear. It was never solely about infrastructure or resource allocation. It was about reshaping power structures on a global scale. Ultimately, the shifting global energy map signals that American centrality has faded into memory. But what do you really think? Let's know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and I will see you in the next video.